Hello and welcome back to episode 4 of The Little Princesses by Marion Crawford. I've been intrigued to read all your comments and your take on this book. I already don't want it to end. I just find it so fascinating. In this next episode, they actually move to Buckingham Palace and you'll find out why. I guess many of you know it's due to the abdication of Uncle David, but also the fact that the late king died, and so there's changes afoot for Queen Mary. Anyway, let's get on with it. It's titled, We Move to Buckingham Palace. The old reign had ended. Presently, Queen Mary moved away from Buckingham Palace to Marlborough House. This is a big square house standing in its own beautiful garden behind a high brick wall, a stone's throw from the palace. It is filled with beautiful things, including Queen Mary's collection of jade, of which she's very proud. Of all the royal houses, this is the most homelike, best kept, every floor and window always shining. Queen Mary's staff never want to leave her. Everyone who works for her loves her very much. And that's a common theme in all the books I've read about Queen Mary. She just seems like a genuinely lovely person. I remember at the time picking up a paper one night and sitting in the court circular, and an unfamiliar name appeared. A Mrs. Simpson, Wallis Simpson, who was among the guests mentioned to the new king's country home, Fort Belvedere. They used to love going up to Fort Belvedere, and Wallis used to very much play the hostess with the mostess when they were up there. I thought nothing of it at the time, but presently, when the rumours and whispers that had long been going on all around the world outside began to reach us, I remembered the name. Now, I'm sure you did, Crawfie. I'm sure you did. Now, she mentions that they saw a lot less of the golden-haired favourite Uncle David. He used to come along and play with the two princesses and have jolly romps. And once Wallis Simpson was on the scene, he didn't seem to want to do that as much. He was more interested in jolly romps with Wallis. One day we were all at Royal Lodge for the weekend and he arrived to tea and he brought friends with him, among them Mrs. Simpson. Can you imagine the level of excitement amongst staff when they cottoned on to the fact that, the new king had arrived with friends and one of them was Wallis Simpson? Oh my goodness me, they'd be tempted to sell the story to newspapers, I think. I looked at her with some interest. She was a smart, attractive woman with that immediate friendliness American women have. It's quite a sneery little statement from Marion Crawford. It's a bit like bless your heart. I don't think that was meant to be complimentary. Immediate friendliness that American women have. Rather snooty, yeah. So they noticed a change in Uncle David. He'd been so youthful and gay. Now he looked distraught and seemed not to be listening to what was said to him. He made plans with the children and then promptly forgot them. So, I guess being the new king, the pressure, the weight of that, and also evidently his relationship with Wallis was pretty fraught. Looking back, I can see now that it was really the end of a chapter. The peace of the house was broken. The cloud had appeared on the horizon. The uneasiness we all sensed in the air grew and did not diminish. So they decided to get the little princesses off to swimming lessons because they were desperate for some sort of diversion, because all the trouble with Wallis and David was just hanging over the house, like she said, and there was a real fear that he was going to abdicate or be forced to abdicate, in which case, their cosy little family life was going to face the ultimate disruption. So she thought it'd be a good idea to go for swimming lessons at the Bath Club to tide them over this anxious and difficult time. The swimming instructress at the Bath Club was Miss Amy Daly. Miss Daly, when I went to see her and tell her she was to have the princesses as pupils, became all hot and bothered. What should she do? Should she curtsy? Ought the baths to be closed when the princesses had their lessons? How should she treat the little girls? So she assured her that she should just treat them like everybody else, and they didn't close the baths specially, And Marion Crawford said that's actually a really good thing because the fact that there was other little girls their age having swimming lessons made them more confident, and particularly Margaret, because Margaret was actually quite terrified. So she would see other little girls jump in and then she would jump in. So, you know, it was good for them to be around other children. She does say a funny thing that Alla, the nanny, made such magnificent preparations for this trip to the swimming bars. She had, as she said, it was like going out on a raft to a desert island. She had large bath towels, dusting powder, combs, brushes, a small box of chocolates. I never got a small box of chocolates when I went for swimming lessons, and they were all packed up into quite a large zip bag. She even added a couple of life buoys. Now, Miss Daly sort of dispatched Alla, the nanny, fairly soon, so she would retreat back into a cubicle and just knit. She was always knitting. The little girls were rather apprehensive on the first day, and when they got there, there was a girl standing poised on the highest step of the diving board, her arms outstretched, her body straight, and she was waiting. Both the children's grips on my hand tightened, and Lilibet drew her breath with horror, and Miss Daly said, "Go," and we watched the most beautiful swan dive. "I shall never be able to do that," Lilibet said. And then Miss Daly laughed and assured her, in fact, she will be able to do that because the girl that she instructed to go was actually blind. So Miss Daly got them to go on this wooden bench and actually have them sort of making, it was really interesting actually. She got them to do the motions of swimming by doing the letters Y, L, T and X with their arms and legs. I've got to try that. I've got to get on my exercise bench and see if that actually works. Lilibet was soon able to pick this up, and we had a lot of amusement out of Margaret, who was plump and wobbled about on the bench. She's so mean about Margaret. She's always saying she's really plump. The Duke and Duchess often came down to watch. It had always been such an immense pleasure to the Duke to see his children accomplish things simply and easily with such confidence, and it never ceased to astonish him because, of course, he was so unconfident during his childhood, probably because he was bullied mercilessly from mean nannies and his father. The outings to the swimming club were the high spots of the week during these rather uneasy times, and they helped a lot to take our minds off the clouds approaching. So she said that she did what she could to keep the children happy throughout this time, but there was a lot of visitors to the house. There was the Prime Minister, Mr. Baldwin, bishops and archbishops, all looking anxious and harried, and the Duke and Duchess never spoke of what was happening, but it was plain to everyone there was a sudden shadow over the house. One afternoon, the Duchess sent for me and I went to see her. The bedroom door opened and Queen Mary came out of the Duchess's room. She, who was always so upright, so alert, looked suddenly very old and very tired. The Duchess was lying in bed, propped up among pillows, and she held her hand out to me. "I'm afraid there's going to be great changes in our life, Crawfie," she said. So they talked for a while, and she broke the news that, in fact, the abdication was going to go ahead and they were going to have to go and live in Buckingham Palace. When I broke the news to Margaret and Lilibet that they were going to live in Buckingham Palace, they looked at me in horror. "What?" Lilibet said. "You mean forever?" Margaret said, "But I have only just learnt to write York." That weekend, the whole family met at Royal Lodge for the farewell dinner to David. No servants were present, which I found really, really interesting. Only Ainsley, the butler, knows what really went on. So therefore, Marion Crawford knows what went on because she was best mates with Ainsley. She's just not letting on. I remember seeing the Duke's face for a moment as he came back late that night, no doubt with his elder brother's voice ringing in his ears with the words ended that fateful broadcast, "God save the King." The proclamation took place on 12th of December 1936. Lilibet and Margaret had run as usual to give their father a final hug as he went off, looking very grave and dressed as an admiral of the fleet. I had to explain to them that when Papa came home to lunch at 1 o'clock, he would be the King of England, and they would have to curtsy to him. "Now you mean we must do that to Papa and Mummy?" Lilibet asked. "Margaret too?" "Margaret also," I told her, "and try not to topple over." When the King returned, Both little girls swept him a beautiful curtsy. I think perhaps nothing had occurred that had brought a change to his condition to him as clearly as this did. He stood for a moment, touched and quite taken aback. Then he stooped and kissed them both warmly. After this, we had a hilarious lunch. The King and the Queen went ahead of us to the palace, and they went over in the meantime and sort of got the girls used to it by getting them to go over and play in the gardens. Now, Crawfie says a funny story that she sat down in the drawing room in a pink and gold chair, and there was an ominous splitting sound, and it actually dissolved right beneath her because it had not been recaned since Queen Victoria's day. Life in the palace rather resembles camping in an old museum. Those historic places are so old, so tied up with tradition, that they mostly are dropping to bits, and all the equipment there decades old. The first night when the housemaid came to pull my bedroom curtains, the whole thing, curtains, pelmet and heavy brass rods, came down with a clatter, narrowly missing our heads. And all this time there was incessant sort of crowds outside the palace, gazing up at it, obviously waiting for something to happen, though they couldn't imagine what. And they in turn used to gaze back at the crowd through the lace curtains. It was a grand new amusement for the children on wet winter afternoons. Now, the question of the schoolroom was a problem because when they checked out the schoolroom that the king actually had, the now king actually had, when he was a little boy, it was very gloomy and depressing and dark, and it had no natural light at all. So they ended up taking over another room, a small bright room that had actually been the nursery for Lilibet when Queen Mary had looked after her while her parents were abroad, and it got all the sun, so it was lovely. Now, Marion Crawford recalls with a shudder the first night spent in the palace. The wind moaned in the chimneys like 1,000 ghosts. I was homesick, as I had not been for a long time for Scotland and the simple life I'd led there as a girl. Now, they found life as sort of a place of enormous long corridors. They left this intimate, cosy, beautiful family home for this sort of huge museum with endless corridors and drafty doors. And yeah, they found it very hard to adapt. Also, there was a lot of vermin, a lot of mice. And there was a vermin man who fought an endless battle against these mice. On my first morning at the palace, when I crossed the corridor on the way to my bathroom, it was a shock to run into the postman. The palace had its own post office, and letters are delivered to the various rooms. So at first it was rather disconcerting to be walking in my dressing gown into what was like a main street. Little girls' happy voices, though, still laughed and shouted as usual as they ran downstairs along the corridors to Mummy and Papa's room. In a very short time, they seemed to set the ghosts to flight, and the whole atmosphere changed and lightened in the palace. And that was what a lot of staff told Crawfie. So they brought a lot of joy, the little princesses, to a lot of people. The house in Piccadilly had been so comfortable and quite small, visitors had been mostly personal friends, and even they had been few and far between. The palace was always full of people coming and going with its post office, secretaries, privy purse, and all the rest of it. Like she said, it was more like a village or a main street than a home. The King and Queen must have thought often regretfully of their quiet evenings, one either side of the fire. The King spent the morning in his study, where he would be visited by secretaries and ministers and ambassadors. And at 1:15, though, the two little girls lunched with their parents as they had at home. So that's good. That's good. In the afternoon, there would be some sort of function, more visitors' documents that demanded the King's attention. Then there would be a short break for tea, after which the Prime Minister or one of the cabinet ministers might come. In the evenings, there was always something doing. Their Majesties would have to attend a reception, a command performance, or a first night of a play or a ballet. I remember seeing the new king sitting solemnly at his desk one afternoon, painstakingly practicing his new signature with a peculiarly sad expression on his face we'd not seen previously. He'd always signed himself Albert. Now all of a sudden he was George, and he had to practice it. The best part of the palace, according to Crawfie, though, was the beautiful, beautiful garden. And they spent a lot of time out there, and they had their favourite places. Lilibet was very motherly with her younger sister. I used to think at one time she gave in to her rather more than was good for Margaret. Sometimes she would say to me in her funny sort of responsible manner, "I really don't know what we're going to do with Margaret, Crawfie," and then she would go on to tell me something she'd been up to. Sounds like she's a little bit of a telltale, Lilibet. Margaret soon joined us at lessons. Margaret had a way, when she knew I was cross with her, of fixing me with those beautiful blue eyes and saying persuasively, "Crawfie, laugh." So often, alas, I just had to laugh. She had a lot of charm, didn't she, Margaret? It's probably why she grew up to be such an impossible brat. We all found the distances in Buckingham Palace wearing. It was a day's march to get from one end of it to the other. The food had to come from the kitchens in the dining rooms all the way down from Buckingham Palace Road end to the Constitutional Hill end. Luckily, they did have burners, warming plates and things to heat everything up. The children had the supper in the nursery. The nursery footman brought up the dishes and put them on a hot plate there. In the nursery, they kept to the old-fashioned white tablecloth. Each child kept her table napkin neatly folded in a silver ring with her name on it. There was always something very pleasant and intimate about these nursery meals. Mice continued to be a menace. One day when I went to my bath, I found a large one sitting on my towel. Well, that would make me jump on top of a chair and scream. The passing postman came in handy. Quaking, I gave him my fire poker and asked him to kill it. He put his bag of letters down and kindly obliged. Oh, that's a bit gory, isn't it? When the day arrived, the children were up early. This is for the coronation. I'm sorry, I skipped one sentence. So the coronation loomed and the children were getting all ready, and Crawfie said very little sleep was got the night before because, of course, the crowds were gathering outside the palace and they would do sing-songs and cheer and call for the royal family, so no one got much sleep. Now, she describes what Margaret and Lilibet actually wore for the coronation. They both wore lace frocks with little silver bows and cloaks edged with ermine. The king had special coronets made for them, very light. I did not see the children that morning until they were dressed, and they came to me rather shyly, a little overawed by their own splendour and their first long dresses. And then we all went together to see the king and queen in their robes. I remember thinking the little queen looked most regal in all the jewellery and splendour. It was a great contrast with those other days when she used to wear tweeds on the moors. Now, she says how exciting it was to head to the coronation in the big horse-drawn carriages. Lilibet and Margaret drove to the Abbey with Queen Mary. Margaret was so small that a place in the carriage had been specifically built up so she could see the crowds out the windows and wave to them, and she did this with much enthusiasm. Lilibet was a bit perturbed on Margaret's account. "I do hope she won't disgrace us all by falling asleep in the middle, Crawfie," she said anxiously. "After all, she is very young for a coronation, isn't she?" So they'd left the palace before 11 in the morning, and it was 5 in the afternoon before they got back. Huge day, especially as the little princesses were only 6 and 11. They were all tired after the long service, but their duties were not yet over. Besides all the balcony appearances, they were called for again and again, and then there was the photographers, and the little girls had to stand about having their pictures taken for the best part of an hour. "We aren't supposed to be human," the Queen once said, rather sadly. Now, the best part of all our lives were the weekends, when we escaped from the palace and all its glories and went down to Royal Lodge, Windsor. At Royal Lodge, court etiquette was forgotten and ceremony left behind. We were just a family again. We had all our meals together and we went for picnics, and above all, we gardened. The whole place had become overgrown and neglected, and the king decided we should start from scratch. So Crawfie never seems to really get any time off, does she? Because she's even going down to Royal Lodge on weekends. So she's got them all through the week for the school sort of week, and then she's got to go weekends and garden at Royal Lodge. She must have been sometimes wishing that she could just have some moments to herself, I would imagine. For on these occasions, the oldest possible tweed stockings and gloves came out, and wisely, for we were in constant danger from trailing brambles, the king had a wonderful collection of tree-cutting implements, which were always a source of worry to the queen and an attraction to the children. They were so sharp that you bled if you even looked at them. For the king, alas, the fun now ended at tea time. There was no more after-tea hide-and-seek, no happy romps about the passages. The parliamentary boxes came, the dreaded boxes. I think King Charles III is the only one on record for saying that he quite enjoyed doing the boxes. These large black leather boxes, well, we know them as red, don't we, contain the papers of the day's doings in Parliament set up by the ministers. They come by dispatch rider and keep the king informed as to what was going on during the day. His own secretaries send up household documents that need attention at the same time. I sometimes wondered whether he had the 2 life-size rocking horses placed outside his study door on purpose so he could hear the thump, thump, thump of the little girls riding them while he worked, and in some way he could feel them near him. So you've got that feeling of excitement, don't you? That's the end of the chapter of the move to Buckingham Palace. But then you also hear the wistful yearning for their old life. You can just hear it even between the lines. The next chapter, chapter 5, is called Royal Occasions. So if you liked this, could you please like, share and subscribe and all that YouTube-y stuff? And I will be back next Friday with another chapter of The Little Princesses by Marion Crawford. Bye.